Evelyn Marsh had been comatose for over a month when the doctors solemnly pronounced her deceased. On a cool summer afternoon, she was laid to rest in a quaint cemetery, a short mile from the house she once called home. "May she find eternal peace," her grieving husband whispered as the final clumps of earth were thrown over her coffin. The mourners slowly dispersed, leaving the freshly turned grave to settle in the silent cemetery. But fate had other plans for Evelyn Marsh. As twilight descended, the cemetery transformed into a shadowy landscape where only the bravest or most foolhardy dared to tread. Under the cover of darkness, a figure moved stealthily among the graves, equipped with a shovel and a flashlight. His heart pounded with the thrill of anticipation. He was a grave robber, and tonight he had his sights set on Evelyn's resting place. The soil, still freshly turned, yielded easily to his efforts. The thief, known in the underworld circles as Razor for his cunning and sharp instincts, quickly reached the coffin. Sweat dripped from his brow as he pried open the lid, revealing Evelyn's peaceful form. His eyes gleamed with greed as he spotted the two precious rings adorning her fingers. One a diamond wedding band, the other a ruby-studded heirloom. Kneeling down, Razor attempted to slide the rings off Evelyn's fingers, but they refused to budge. Frustration bubbled up inside him. He cursed under his breath, deciding there was only one way to claim his prize. He unsheathed his knife, its blade glinting menacingly in the moonlight, and began to cut at Evelyn's fingers. To his horror, as the knife bit into her flesh, blood began to ooze from the wound. Evelyn's body twitched violently, and with a gasp that echoed through the still night, she sat up. Panic-stricken, Razor stumbled backward, his flashlight clattering to the ground and extinguishing its beam. Darkness swallowed him, heightening his terror. He could hear Evelyn stirring, the rustle of her burial shroud sending shivers down his spine. Frozen with fear, he clutched his knife tightly, his mind racing with disbelief and dread. How could she be alive? Evelyn, now shrouded in her burial garments, turned her gaze upon him. Her eyes, once dull and lifeless, now gleamed with an eerie light. In a voice that was both weary and serene, she asked,
"Who are you?"
The words sent Razor into a frenzy. He bolted, his heart pounding in his chest like a war drum. Blind terror clouded his judgment, and in his desperate flight, he tripped and tumbled headfirst into the open grave, impaling himself on his own blade. Pain seared through his body as he lay there, the cold earth pressing in around him. He tried to scream, but his voice was lost in the night. Meanwhile, Evelyn, unfazed by the chaotic events, wrapped her shroud around herself and began the slow walk back to her home. Her mind was a foggy landscape of confusion and fragments of memories. She remembered the coma, the darkness that had enveloped her, and the brief moments of awareness before being pronounced dead. But now, she was awake, driven by an inexplicable force to return to the place she once knew. As she walked, the night air grew colder, and the distant hoot of an owl punctuated the silence. Evelyn moved with an otherworldly grace, her bare feet gliding over the ground. She felt no fear, only a strange sense of purpose. The cemetery, with its rows of silent headstones, seemed to watch her pass with bated breath. Behind her, the grave robber lay in the pit he had dug, his life ebbing away with each passing second. Razor's breaths grew shallow, his vision blurred by pain and shock. The irony of his fate was not lost on him. He had dug his own grave, quite literally. As the darkness closed in, his thoughts drifted to the stories he had heard of the restless dead, tales he had always dismissed as mere superstition. Now he was living, or rather, dying, proof of their truth. In the shadow of the Ember Line tracks, a cluster of decrepit storage sheds huddled against the elements. These sheds, once vital to the bustling Baltimore and Ohio Railroad, had long been abandoned and repurposed by the destitute. The sheds offered scant shelter from the bitter winter winds that howled through every crack, and the small makeshift fireplaces barely warded off the chill. Among the residents was a kind-hearted woman named Sophia. Life had not been kind to Sophia, and with no family to support her, she found herself seeking work wherever she could and living in whatever shelter she could find. Sophia's days were spent scavenging for food and tending to the sick and hungry neighbors, often at the expense of her own well-being. Despite her hardships, she remained a beacon of hope and kindness in the desolate encampment. One frigid evening in late autumn, Sophia sat huddled over her meager fire, sipping thin broth from a wooden bowl. The fire's warmth was a fleeting comfort, and she shivered as she tried to fend off the cold. As she stared into the flickering flames, a rogue spark leapt from the fire and ignited the hem of her tattered skirt. Absorbed in her thoughts, Sophia didn't notice the growing flames until they seared her skin. With a scream, she leapt up, desperately trying to smother the fire with her broth, but the liquid only sizzled and steamed, doing nothing to quell the flames. In a panic, Sophia fled the shed, her body now a torch blazing through the night. She ran along the tracks, her cries for help echoing into the cold darkness. The station was not far, and Sophia instinctively headed toward it, hoping for salvation. The fire consumed her, and her agonized screams grew weaker as her strength ebbed. She staggered blindly onto the tracks just west of the station, her body now a human inferno. She neither saw the approaching train's headlight nor heard its frantic whistle. In moments, her screams were silenced as the train bore down upon her. The station crew, alerted by the train's whistle, rushed to the scene. The engineer, shaken and pale, recounted the horrifying sight of Sophia's burning figure on the tracks. The crew extinguished the flames and carried her charred remains back to the station. Sophia was given a pauper's funeral and buried in an unmarked grave in the town's cemetery. Life moved on, and soon another family occupied her shed, the memory of Sophia fading into the cold wind. But Sophia's spirit did not rest. 1 month later, a train rounding the bend west of the station encountered a spectral, fiery figure. The engineer's eyes widened in terror as the ghostly apparition appeared on the tracks, its agonized screams echoing through the night. Too late to stop, the train passed through the burning specter before screeching to a halt. The engineer, trembling, ran back along the tracks, but found no trace of a body. Upon reaching the station, the shaken engineer recounted his tale. The station master, remembering Sophia's tragic end, realized that her restless spirit had returned to haunt the place of her demise.
We often laugh at little kids for one peculiar habit, leaving lights on everywhere. Every room they enter, they turn the lights on as if it's some sort of security blanket. And when you force them to turn the lights off, they cry and scream until eventually you give in. The only time they willingly turn them off is with their parents, feeling so very safe. You see, I am the monster that lives in your closet. I'm friends with the one under your bed and the one lurking in the shadows. When you catch a glimpse of us, you flee to your mommy and daddy, seeking refuge under their watchful eyes. But here's the thing. We're not here to hurt you. In fact, we're here to protect you. If you think we're scary, just wait till you see their true form. They masquerade as one of you, blending seamlessly into your world. You humans must be blind not to see it. Your true monsters sleep just down the hall, wearing faces of love and trust. They pretend to care, but it won't last. They try to convince us to let them in, to drop our guard, but don't worry. We genuinely love you, and we will protect you. Every time you see a shadow flit across the room, or a figure standing silently in the closet, remember, we scary monsters are the guardians keeping you safe from the human ones. Those creatures in your home, the ones you think you know, are the real danger. Little Frank was just 5 when he first saw me. He was peeking out from beneath his covers, eyes wide and fearful. I stood in the corner, a dark silhouette against the moonlight streaming through his window. I could see his tiny hands trembling, clutching his blanket.
"Go away,"
he whispered, voice quivering. I stayed silent, watching, waiting. From the hallway, a soft creak. Frank's parents' door opening. A shadow moved outside his room. I felt the presence immediately. One of them, the true monsters. Frank's father stepped into the doorway, a smile plastered on his face.
"Everything okay, champ?"
Frank nodded, not daring to speak. His father looked in my direction but saw nothing, his human eyes blind to my presence. He walked over, kissed Frank's forehead, and whispered a soft good night before leaving the room. I remained, ensuring Frank fell back to sleep. The next morning, the boy ran to his parents, recounting the tale of the monster in his room. They laughed, of course, dismissing it as a child's wild imagination. They didn't know the truth. They couldn't. Over the years, Frank saw me and my friends less and less. As he grew older, he turned the lights off without fear, feeling a false sense of security. But we never left. We watched from the shadows, always vigilant. One stormy night, when Frank was 15, I saw the father's true nature rear its head. Anger flared, and he raised his hand against Frank's mother. Frank, now a teenager, stood frozen in the hallway, unable to move, unable to help. But I was there. I stepped forward, revealing myself to the father for the first time. His eyes widened in terror as he saw me, truly saw me.
"What are you?"
He stammered, backing away. "A protector," I replied, my voice a low growl. That night, Frank's father packed his bags and left, driven away by the sight of a monster he couldn't comprehend. Frank never knew what had really happened. His mother told him his father had left for reasons unknown. Years passed, and Frank grew into a man. He moved away, started his own family, and rarely thought of the monsters from his childhood. But on quiet nights, when the shadows danced just a bit too lively, he remembered. He remembered the strange comfort he felt in the presence of those he once feared. So, when you see a shadow flit or a figure in the closet, remember this. We scary monsters protect you from the human ones. You're safe with us. For now.
Exeter, Rhode Island, a place where fear and superstition once danced hand in hand, where the veil between life and death was as thin as a whisper, and where the specter of tuberculosis, known as consumption, cast a long, chilling shadow over the land. In the final decades of the 19th century, the Brown family found themselves ensnared in a web of death and dread. George and Mary Brown watched helplessly as the merciless grip of consumption claimed their loved ones one by one. Mary Eliza, the matriarch, was the first to succumb, her life extinguished like a candle in a gust of wind. Next, their eldest daughter, Mary Olive, followed her mother into the cold embrace of the grave, her name etched into the stone as a silent testament to her passing. But the darkest chapter in the Browns' tale was yet to be written. In 1891, the specter of the disease returned, this time ensnaring young Mercy and her brother Edwin in its deadly grasp. The villagers, their minds steeped in the superstitions of the time, began to murmur of the undead, of dark forces at work. They whispered that one of the deceased Browns was a vampire, feeding on the living and dragging Edwin closer to death's door. Desperation and fear drove the villagers to George Brown's doorstep. They pleaded with him, their eyes wide with terror, to allow the exhumation of his family's bodies. On a bleak March day in 1892, a grim assembly of townsfolk, the local doctor, and a newspaper reporter gathered in the cemetery, their breath misting in the chill air as they unearthed the graves. Mary Eliza and Mary Olive, long in their rest, showed the expected signs of decay, their bones silent and still. But when they opened Mercy's grave, a gasp rippled through the crowd. Her body, stored in the icy grip of an above-ground crypt for 2 months, was eerily untouched by time. Blood still pooled in her heart, a crimson accusation. The villagers recoiled in horror, convinced they had found their vampire. Driven by fear and the ancient rites of superstition, they tore Mercy's heart and liver from her body, igniting them in a fire that sent dark plumes of smoke spiraling into the sky. The ashes were mixed with water to create a grim tonic, which they forced upon the ailing Edwin in a desperate bid to save him. But the potion of despair could not stave off death's inevitable embrace. Edwin perished 2 months later, his body joining the family in their haunted repose. Mercy's desecrated remains were reburied in the cemetery of the Baptist Church in Exeter, a silent witness to the terror that had gripped the town. Her story, like so many others, was swallowed by the shadows of time, a dark echo in the annals of history. George Brown, the patriarch, stood alone amidst the graves of his family. Remarkably, he remained untouched by the disease that had ravaged his loved ones. He lived on, haunted by memories, until 1922, just long enough to witness the creation of a medicine that brought hope to a world weary of consumption's relentless toll. Growing up, sleep had never come easily to me. The nights were often restless, and sleep paralysis was a frequent, unwelcome visitor. Over the years, I'd tried everything to combat it, counting sheep, deep breathing exercises, even sleeping pills. Nothing worked. Then, about 6 months ago, I decided to bless my room, hoping that a bit of divine intervention might do what science could not. Miraculously, the episode stopped. I finally enjoyed nights of uninterrupted sleep. Until that one night. It was about a year ago when it happened. I woke in the middle of the night, my body frozen, pinned to the bed by an unseen force. My room was dimly lit by the soft blue glow of my nightlight, casting faint shadows on the walls. I tried to move, but every attempt was met with a piercing, loud ringing in both ears. The noise grew louder each time I struggled, until it felt like my head would explode. I was terrified. Fear kept my eyes squeezed shut, but I could feel it. A presence, ominous and overwhelming, filled the room. The air felt thick, pressing down on me, making it hard to breathe. I sensed someone, no, something, watching me. Summoning every ounce of courage, I cracked open my eyes. There, in the corner of my room, stood a tall, dark figure. It was almost too tall to be human, its head nearly touching the ceiling. The figure's skin was a deep, shadowy black, blending into the darkness of the room. But what struck me the most were the horns. 2 large, twisted horns protruded from each side of its head, curving menacingly upward. The creature was facing me, its gaze unseen but deeply felt. Panic surged through me. I tried to move again, desperate to break free from the paralysis. The ringing in my ears intensified, becoming almost unbearable. Tears streamed down my face, but I couldn't make a sound. My mind raced, searching for a way out of this nightmare. In my desperation, I closed my eyes and began to pray. God will protect me. God will protect me, I repeated over and over in my mind, clinging to the hope that my faith could save me from this terror. Then, a low, guttural voice cut through the ringing in my ears. It was deep and malevolent, dripping with a cold, cruel amusement.
God can't help you anymore.
The words sent a chill down my spine, freezing me in a way the paralysis never had. The voice was not just a sound, it was a feeling, a presence that seeped into my very being. My mind screamed in silent horror as I realized the futility of my prayers. For what felt like an eternity, I lay there, eyes clenched shut, repeating my desperate mantra. God will protect me. God will protect me. Even as doubt crept in. The presence didn't move, didn't speak again, but its malevolent energy filled the room, suffocating me with fear. Eventually, exhaustion overcame my terror. My body, pushed to its limits, slipped into a fitful sleep. When I awoke in the morning, the figure was gone, the room bathed in the soft light of dawn. My muscles ached, and my throat was raw, as if I'd been screaming all night. The events of the night before felt like a terrible dream, but the residual fear told me otherwise. The experience left me shaken, a constant reminder of the darkness that lurked just beyond the edge of sleep. I blessed my room again, and though the sleep paralysis never returned, I could never fully shake the feeling that something was watching, waiting. The memory of that night haunted me, a chilling reminder that some nightmares are all too real. Even now, as I lie in bed, I can sometimes feel the weight of that presence in the corner of the room, hear the echo of that sinister voice. And I know that while the nightlight may keep the shadows at bay, it cannot banish the darkness that once claimed me.